tell you something about Andrew. This is my boy right here. You disrespect him, you're disrespecting me.
Inside fighting. Sean's inside fighting.
We are back. It is the Fight Season Podcast. It's me, Jesse Rowe, with Inside Fighting, joined as always by Inside Fighting's head writer and MMA aficionado, Timothy James, aka Timmy Shoes, back in Brazil. Timmy, how are you? UFC 296. Just what was your feeling about the weekend, the final UFC event of the year, capped it all off? How are you feeling, my man?
I'm feeling good. Glad to be back. Always a pleasure to be talking the fight game. UFC 296 was a very interesting card, but I am a little sad that we're heading into this dark period for fight fans where there won't be any more UFC for something like 26 days. So this is always a sad time of the year. But UFC 296 was very entertaining. The main card, some of the fights were a little lackluster. Like the main event was a little bit not what we were expecting, I'll put it that way. But the undercards were really great. They were mostly finishes. I think only 2 of them didn't end in finishes, and the 2 that did were crazy decisions, wars. So overall, really good card.
Yeah, it was a good card for like the first 60%, and then it kind of teetered off at the end, which is surprising. And I think that's what we're going to get to as to why that happened. I think we'll get to that. But that it leads us to why the main card kind of fell a little bit short, right? And it starts and ends kind of with Colby Covington, I think. And it's sort of where all week leading up to the fight, Colby was talking all sorts of shit, saying all sorts of crazy things, talking about bringing Leon to the 7th layer of hell, and then talked about how we're gonna say what's up to your dad when we're there in the 7th layer of hell. If you don't know, Leon Edwards' father was murdered when he was 13 years old over supposedly a dispute over money. It was in Jamaica. I don't know, was his father in a gang? What was it? Do you know the backstory of this?
I don't know the backstory. That's what I know, that Colby alleges that. I don't really know the backstory. His father was involved in some sort of gang-related activity.
So, he was murdered, and it flustered Leon Edwards. Like, you could tell. He was visibly flustered by this, and that was my concern. We talked about it in Insider Betting. I was very concerned that Leon was not going to be himself. He was going to be impatient. Yeah. And I think we all expected Colby to be really aggressive in this fight. This is probably his last title shot if he loses.
Yeah. He was supposed to fight like Colby Covington, and that didn't happen.
It was just a bad performance, I think we can say. Yeah. Like that, it was just a shitty performance by Colby. And it's not even about him having an off night. It's that he wasn't even trying the first 3 rounds. I mean, like, just not even trying. And then when he did try, he was slow. There was nothing effective. He didn't land anything of substance. Leon, that's probably like the easiest 5-round decision win Leon Edwards has ever had in his entire career. And where I really want to go with this was the reaction of the MMA community, because they were very much ready to pile on Colby. Guys like Ray Luongo, Aljamain Sterling's coach, basically just called Colby a piece of shit. That he had this really funny comment about calling out Leon Edwards' college or his education history. He's like, I'd love to see your college transcripts. You're a fucking moron. It's just really funny stuff. John Jones, who was Colby's roommate at one point back in college, tweeted about it saying, thank you to Leon for handling it. I owe you a motorcycle. We interviewed Michael Chandler, who was making all sorts of jokes about Colby's pro-American comments. He was like, Leon landed 1,776 shots to your face and you had 0 offense. It was very much the MMA community was happy to pile on Colby. What does the UFC do with Colby Covington? Because it seems like that was it for Colby. Like the gig is kind of up, and I think the MMA community was kind of like, we're not gonna reward this anymore. And even Dana in his post-fight press conference was saying it bothered him. You could tell Dana wasn't happy with it. Donald Trump left Colby's post-fight speech in the middle of Colby's post-fight speech. A pro-Colby crowd was booing him during his post-fight speech. I know I'm rambling here, but I'm just like, it feels like this might be the end of the Colby Covington as a major storyline thing in the UFC. I could be wrong. What's your take on it?
I do think it's the end of the Colby as a title contender in welterweight, and I think he made that pretty clear in the post-fight press conference when he called out Wonder Boy. I think he called out Wonder Boy during his Octagon interview
Wonder Boy,
as
he was
well.
called a pedophile, by the way, for, you know, giving back to the community, like teaching kids karate. You know, it's
Yeah.
like stuff like that, where it's like you're calling him a pedophile. When do those kids see it, man? I don't know. I just, it's weird to me. Go ahead.
Listen, Colby took 2 years off. He's 35. I think he's in this stage where I don't think he believes he can be a champion anymore. I don't think the UFC is going to want to give him a title shot, especially after that performance. He would have to go on a run against some top talent. And a reporter even asked him, "What would you face Shavkat?" Which is a fight that would make sense if he was still interested. I
Makes a
think he's
lot of
entering a
sense, man.
phase.
That fight makes a ton of sense, if
Yeah,
you ask me.
he's in a phase where I think he just wants fights that are interesting and fights that he thinks he can win and get a paycheck. And Wonder Boy is obviously a very great matchup for him because Wonder Boy has struggled against wrestlers. Going back to the fight, I think this was the worst possible way Colby could have lost. I think if Colby got head kicked at some moment and got knocked out, it would have been better, especially if it happened early in the fight, because at least people could say it was a fluke. This was pure domination for most of the fight, so much so that when Colby finally got his first takedown, I believe it was in the third round, Leon immediately stands up and then takes him down. And then Leon stands up again. He's like, "I took you down because you're my bitch." And then he stood up. He's like, "I'm beating you in
Yeah,
every facet of the game."
that's what I texted you when we were watching it. I was like, Leon literally just took him down just to get that take, because he took Colby took him down, and then he gets back up, takes Colby down easily, and just stands right back up and was just like, "Hey, I just wiped your takedown out. Let's get back to
Yeah.
stand up." It was like Colby looked defeated, but at the same time, but then he was fucking celebrating like he won the fight. And I don't know, man. I don't
Yeah.
know. That was,
That's a thing I think we learned. It's a thing we've known for a while. A guy like Colby, his shtick, his character only works if he's winning or if he's very competitive in close fights. So when he's winning, it works. When he's in classic all-time great fights with Kamaru Usman, it works. But when you get dominated in a fight like that against Leon Edwards, a guy who you talk trash to and said all this stuff, it falls apart. It falls so flat that a crowd that was cheering for him in the beginning of the fight, like you said, was booing him at the end. So
he talked
yeah,
shit about the guy's dead, murdered father and like put on that performance. I don't know. It just rubs me the wrong way where I'm like, you can't reward that with anything. Like, I know that like
yeah,
technically he's a draw, but like, I don't know. He hasn't won any. He's talked all this shit to get these pay-per-view headliners, right? He hasn't won any title fights, so he doesn't get the pay-per-view points for that. It's like, what have you really gained from this? What have you really gained from this other than maybe social media following, you know, and some like brand sponsorships? Like he gets to go on Tucker Carlson and shit like that. Like, other than that, what have you really
yeah.
gained in the UFC? Not much, man. I don't know, not much. Oh, by the way, this episode of the Fight Season podcast is brought to you by DraftKings. We got to pay the bills here. DraftKings right now, if you want to bet on any of these NFL games, you can bet $5 of your own money, and you get $150 of bonus bets instantly if you are a new DraftKings customer. Just go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app, use promo code INSIDEFIGHTING, bet $5, get $150 of bonus bets instantly. Bet on some NFL games and have some fun. So it gets into this whole topic about whether the trash talk this week went too far. You had Strickland talking about Sean O'Malley's wife having sex with other men. You had Dricus Du Plessis talking about Sean Strickland's dad beating him when he was a kid. "I'm going to give you a worse beating than your dad did." So this week was kind of a dark week in terms of trash talk. Sean Strickland is sitting in front of Dricus Du Plessis at UFC 296. This is 2 days after the seasonal press conference that they had, the first one that they've had in a couple of years since COVID hit. And they had this little moment where they were both on camera, and for some fucking stupid reason, they were seated right next to each other. Dana White even said that was a mistake, that he screwed up. That was oversight on his part. and Strickland stands up and like flexes to the crowd, turns around, points his finger gun at Dricus and shoots him, and then Dricus starts like, shadow boxing and keeps talking shit behind Strickland. We didn't see it at the time because the telecast had actually panned away, but 2 or 3 seconds after that, Strickland looks at Gilbert Burns' son in the audience, and Gilbert Burns' wife tells them to move away because they were separated by a row. Gilbert Burns' wife, Gilbert Burns' son, and Brandon Moreno were sort of sitting right there. Tells them to move out of the way, and then he just starts throwing fucking elbows and hammer fists on top of Dricus's head. And I agree, Timmy. I actually think that this is making that fight so much more interesting than it had any right to be, because we all thought that was going to be Izzy versus Dricus, right? We all thought that's what the fight was going to be, and now it's like, holy shit, this fight actually has some juice behind it, and I'm very excited. That's the fight that's going to kick off the year. So I want to ask you, is Sean Strickland crazy enough to control where that was actually staged, and that was a way to get this title fight a little more interesting?
I don't think so at all.
I don't either.
think
I just wanted to pose the question. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a conspiracy theory that I'll run by with you, but man, that's exactly how I feel about it, because when Strickland won, I was like, that's awesome for Strickland. It was great because it was super surprising, but I really wanted to see Izzy versus Dricus because the hype for that had already been built up so much. Izzy dropping the N-bombs on Dricus, and Dricus just sort of, standing there taking it, and, the whole African fighter thing. There was so much behind it. And the Strickland versus Dricus thing, it was sort of like, oh man, like, all right, Dricus deserves it, but there's nothing compelling. This makes it really compelling. I think a lot of more people are going to care about the outcome of this fight. And are you ready for my conspiracy theory?
Yeah.
Because Dricus was always a guy who's pretty much very respectful, not like GSP levels of respect, but he was not a guy who really got into the trash talk, at least not to the level that he did in that press conference, right? During that whole thing, I think it was with Izzy's dog, he interviewed MMA Guru, who's the guy who revealed all that stuff, or had some sort of or he made a bunch of content that were viral. Anyway, he got interviewed by that guy, and every time that guy gives advice to a fighter, he says they should turn into a heel, go full heel, turn into the villain, be a piece of shit, because being respectful will not get people to care. So I think after that interview, Guru was like, go full heel, you're fighting Sean Strickland, be a piece of shit, talk shit about him, go low, and I think he did, and now the fight is 10 times bigger. So if that's true, it worked.
I love it. I love that take. I agree. I'm way more interested in it than I ever was before. I'm excited for it. Apparently Strickland started crying on Theo Von's podcast, by the way, and that one is going to air pretty soon. So I do think Strickland's going through some emotional shit over this, because he was abused by his father. He's talked openly about it. So yeah. I do think that this is serious. I hope that Strickland is smart enough to sort of handle it in the right way, that this doesn't affect him outside of the ring, because I do think Strickland is interesting as a champion. Last thing, the knockout of the year happened. We have 2 minutes left on the Zoom, Timmy. Let's end it. Bryce Mitchell got knocked into the shadow realm by Josh Emmett. He was knocked out. He was convulsing on the ground. He actually made an Instagram video thanking Josh Emmett for not following up with any punches afterwards, because you could have killed me.
But I want to let y'all know that I'm so happy with Josh Emmett, because right after he knocked me out, he could have followed up with the hammer fist, and it probably would have killed me. And he didn't even follow up with anything. He was just happy with his knockout, and he walked away.
Really quick, you have 2 minutes left. Was that the greatest knockout of the year? Does that count as the knockout of the year? Because I still think Izzy versus Pereira is my knockout of the year, just because of the stakes. Yeah. But man, that is the scariest knockout I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah. I won't call it the knockout of the year simply because stakes are important to me. It every once in a while there's a knockout or a submission or something that makes me feel guilty about being an MMA fan. And that was one of them. You know, when the fight started, one of the first things I noticed was just how much bigger Josh Emmett is than Bryce Mitchell, who is a smaller guy for a featherweight. There are smaller guys at featherweight. Part of me wondered if he could drop down to bantamweight. But anyway, the one punch knockout, I even tweeted, thank God Josh Emmett channeled his inner Mark Hunt and did the walk off, because Bryce is exactly right. When he was convulsing, there was a part of me that was like, oh no, I mean, he might not ever be the same. And that might still be the case. Bryce Mitchell might not ever be the same after this. You've seen guys like, Terry Edom get knocked out, never come back. So he's absolutely right. Josh Emmett is a class act. And Bryce Mitchell, it sucked seeing him go out like that. I hope he comes back healthy.
Me too. I like him he could potentially be a draw if he can turn his career around, but it's one of those things where you might want to consider a different career if it keeps happening to you, so we'll see what happens. Yeah. Josh Emmett, 40 years old, 39, 40 years old. This run, I hope he gets a title shot, because I fucking
Me too.
Got a lot of power for that division. So I love Josh Emmett. He's a great dude, fun to interview. Good guy. Anyways, thank you guys for watching the Fight Season podcast. It's me, Jesse Rowe. It's him, Timmy Shoes. Thank you to DraftKings for sponsoring this episode, and check us out on Insider Betting. Peace out.
Peace.
Let me tell you something about Andrew. This is my boy right here. You disrespect him, you're disrespecting me.
Inside fighting, Sean Inside fighting.